$540,000. The judge's tone sliced through the charged courtroom like a knife. The words rang off the walls, heavy, decisive, and impossible to escape. All in a split second, years of hurt, betrayal, and manipulation descended on Kody Brown. Meri didn't blink. She remained seated, face a blending of quiet fortitude and relief, as though she'd been waiting her whole life to receive those very words. But over in the living room, Kody dissolved. His face reddened, body contracted, and the tantrum ensued. This wasn't merely a legal war. This was the fall of an empire built on charm, half-truths, and domination by Kody. For the first time ever, the decades of deceit that had shielded him were exposed and bare, and the world beheld the man behind the facade. What caused this shocking verdict? How did Meri, the wife so repeatedly pushed aside and quieted, emerge victorious in a courtroom battle that left Kody embarrassed? This is the complete account of betrayal, courtroom drama, and the deceit that undermined him. For several years, Sister Wives viewers had witnessed the complicated, messy dynamics of Kody Brown's plural marriage unfold on the small screen. At the center of the matter was Kody, the self-styled patriarch, the man who required devotion while showing favoritism, and the husband who frequently reduced the needs of his wives to zero unless they aligned with his agenda. Meri, his initial wife, had suffered it all. She observed as Kody emotionally distanced himself from her, lavished Robin with attention, and treated her as an afterthought. The audience witnessed the hurt on television, but what they did not witness was the financial crisis unfolding in the background. According to court filings, Kody had quietly redirected family money, including funds connected to Meri's ventures, into his own projects. Business investments, property purchases, even borrowed cash, all done without Meri's full knowledge or approval. For years, Meri pushed it aside. She rationalized it was simply family finances. She told herself things would improve. But as the favoritism increased, as her voice became quieter, and as the lies began to stack up, something within her broke. She wasn't losing money, she was losing herself. So Meri made the bravest move of her life. She sued Kody, seeking damages for more than $500,000. It was a step that would spark one of the most explosive trials the Brown family had ever known. Every family has secrets. Every marriage has cracks. But when those cracks extend across decades, across several wives, and across millions of dollars, they don't just lead to fights, they lead to earthquakes. For Meri Brown, the first wife of Kody Brown, the fissures had been in place for years. The emotional distance, the favoritism, the coldness, the fact that she was always asked to make sacrifices but never given something back. Viewers of Sister Wives glimpsed her pain on TV, but what they didn't know were the numbers off stage, the money that went missing, the hidden expenses, the financial choices made without consultation. Meri stayed silent for a while. She rationalized it was simply the family way. After all, in a polygamous marriage, everything had to be shared, didn't it? But gradually she came to see something more sinister at play. Something deliberate. And the guy right in the middle of it all was the very same guy who once vowed her forever, Kody Brown. This realization would lead Meri down a path she never imagined she'd take into a courtroom, across from Kody, fighting for what was rightfully hers. And that single choice would unleash a storm that would shake the entire Brown family to its core. Meri's journey didn't start with dollar signs. It started with trust, or rather the slow erosion of it. In the beginning of her marriage, Meri did believe in the dream that Kody promised to everyone. Big family. Love shared, resources shared. One household where they would all contribute, and then everyone would get something out of it. But what seemed like unity outside was really control at home. Kody made the major financial decisions. He determined where money was spent, what properties were bought, and what investments were the worth. Meri, as well as the other wives, was supposed to simply nod along, and she had for years. But as time passed, Meri began noticing oddities. Money she thought was set aside for her business suddenly disappeared. Promises of financial support for her projects turned into excuses. When she asked Kody directly, he dismissed her. He'd say things like, "It's just temporary. I'll pay it back soon. You're overreacting. Those answers weren't deflects. They were gaslighting. Gradually, Meri started questioning her own intuition. Was she making it up? Was she selfish? Didn't family come first anyway? But the proof continued to accumulate. And the more Meri searched, the more she understood the reality. Kody wasn't investing money in the family. He was investing it in himself. Each human being has a breaking point. And for Meri, this occurred after years of being pushed around emotionally and financially. By then, fans of Sister Wives had already seen her struggle. She was marginalized, excluded from making decisions, and frequently made to feel irrelevant. Kody even openly admitted that their marriage in fact was over. But what fans witnessed on TV was not the only heartbreak Meri endured in secret. The truth that she had been financially drained without her permission. One day, Meri sat down and looked over bank statements and contracts related to her business ventures. What she discovered only confirmed her worst suspicions. Money she had earned, money destined for her independence, had been diverted into Kody's own business ventures. Some of it had even been used to bail out his business failures. That was it. That was the moment. The weeping, the silence, the years of going along with his control. Over in its place was determination. Meri hired a lawyer. She collected evidence, and she took the step that would forever alter the power dynamic in the Brown family. She sued Kody for the missing $540,000. When the lawsuit was filed, the Brown household was thrown into chaos. To Kody, this wasn't just about money. It was about betrayal. He saw Meri's move as treason, as her stepping outside the family unit and challenging his authority. Robin, his favored wife, stood firmly by his side, insisting Meri was overreacting. Janelle and Christine, however, had mixed reactions. While they weren't directly involved, they understood Meri's pain. They had seen Kody's controlling behavior up close. But the idea of one wife dragging him into court, that was unprecedented. Fans of the series buzzed with rumor. News headlines swirled. Social media erupted. Viewers had pleaded with Meri to assert herself for years. And now, finally, she had. Kody responded to the lawsuit in typical fashion. Arrogance. He dismissed it, certain that Meri didn't have a hope in hell. In his head, he had always been the one calling the shots. He was sure he could manipulate the narrative, become the victim, and persuade the court that Meri was bitter and irrational. In private, however, fissures began to appear. He frantically searched for explanations for the disappearance of the money. He instructed Robin on what to tell the truth about. He even attempted to frighten Meri, assuring her that betraying the family would ruin her. But Meri did not yield. With each threat, each dismissal, her conviction only strengthened. For the first time in decades, she was no longer afraid of Kody. This case was not about $540,000. This case was about years of silence broken. For all those years, Meri had been the outsider in her own family. The lonely wife, the one Kody didn't desire, the one who was constantly left behind. But in that courtroom, she wasn't the outsider. She was the warrior. Each paper submitted, each fact presented, was more than legal documents. It was a declaration: I count. My voice counts, my future counts. And that was the true strength of this case. It wasn't purely a matter of money. It was about taking back dignity from a man who had devoted so many years to stripping it away. By the day of the court hearing, the stage was set for one of the most explosive showdowns in Brown family history. On one side was Meri, with evidence, guts, and a newfound determination to stand up for herself. On the other side was Kody, arrogant, defensive, and eager to uphold the image of a man in command. The lawsuit wasn't merely a legal issue. It was the first act of a war that would alter everything. The family, the show, the empire Kody believed was invincible. And when the courtroom doors swung open, one thing was certain: the Brown family would never be the same again. When the trial started, Kody entered court like a man who thought he couldn't lose. He had spent years dictating the script at home and on TV. To him, this was simply another opportunity to play the part of the confident patriarch. But courtrooms are not reality television. Charm does not compete with evidence. And soon enough, the weaknesses in Kody's defense began to surface. Kody's lawyers argued that all money belonged to the family unit. They painted Meri as unreasonable, claiming she was trying to punish Kody out of bitterness. But Meri's legal team came prepared with hard evidence: bank records, signed contracts, and even witnesses who confirmed the misuse of funds. And then came the testimony that shook the courtroom, a recording of a family meeting. On it, Kody was heard saying he had borrowed significant sums of money, without informing anyone, waving it off as what's best for the family. The jury and judge listened intently. The smug grin that Kody had brought with him into the room gradually started to dissolve. His hands twitched, his jaw clenched. For the first time in years, Kody knew he couldn't talk his way out of this one. Kody Brown was used to being the man in charge. For years he'd been balancing 4 wives, a dozen or so kids, and the public spotlight of reality television. He posed like he was confident, charming, even invincible. So, when Meri sued for $540,000 in damages, Kody wasn't afraid. Not initially. In his mind, this was merely another fight, and he was sure he could spin it the same way he always had. He thought the same charm that had worked on cameras and family gatherings would work in court. Charm does not stand up to cross-examination, and lies do not stand up to cold hard proof. Nevertheless, Kody went into court believing he would win. What resulted, instead of a defense, was a hapless spider web of deceptions, coming apart thread by thread, until there remained only the unadorned truth. Kody's defense lawyers designed a plan that was ringingly familiar to anyone who had seen Sister Wives. Step 1. Portray the family as a single fiscal unit. Step 2. Blame Meri for bitterness and overstatement. Step 3. Demand that Kody was a victim of misperception, not ill will. It was a routine that had been rehearsed for years. Whenever Meri confronted him, he'd tell her she was dreaming. Whenever she complained, he'd write it off as an emotional episode. In his head, if this was getting him out of trouble at home, it would get him out of trouble in court. But this wasn't the Brown family. This was a court of law, and each word he said was parsed. Kody's central defense was straightforward. All the funds were family money. He maintained that nothing was owned by any single wife, that money was communal, and that Meri had no basis on which to distance herself from the bigger picture. It made sense on paper. Wasn't that the entire idea behind plural marriage? To collect resources and share everything. But Meri's attorneys were ready. They pointed out that many of the funds in question were tied directly to Meri's businesses, ventures she had built and managed on her own. They showed contracts with her signature only, accounts registered under her name, and evidence that these were not communal funds, but personal earnings. With every attempt by Kody to muddy the waters, the lawyers clarified them. And with every new discovery, his family money alibi weakened. The turning point was during cross-examination. Initially, Kody was cocky, even arrogant. He replied with smooth ease, flashing that familiar smile. But the deeper the questions probed, the more his cockiness began to crumble. The lawyers inquired into very particular money transfers. Why had thousands of dollars from her accounts been transferred into one of his real estate investments? Why had profits from businesses she was owed been diverted into a family account that only he and Robin controlled? Kody's explanations changed with every answer. It was just a loan. She knew about it. It was for the family. Every statement contradicted the previous one. And then came the shocking revelation: a tape of an earlier family gathering. On the tape, Kody was heard confessing that he had borrowed money from Meri without permission, referring to it as borrowing for the greater good. The room fell silent. Kody's face turned red. His defense had just disintegrated under the strains of his own testimony. With the pressure building, Kody's veneer of polish began to crack. He cut in on the lawyers. He butted heads with the judge. He accused Meri's people of distorting the facts. He even leaned over at one point and barked, "This is vengeance. She's resentful because I don't love her anymore." The outburst gasped in the room. For years, viewers had wondered about Kody's coldness towards Meri, but hearing him use it as a weapon in court was shocking. The judge reprimanded him harshly, telling him to control his temper. But Kody couldn't. The man who always appeared to be above reproach was suddenly defensive, raging and desperate. His own words were against him, and his actions only made him appear guiltier. Meri's attorneys had another surprise. Witnesses. Several people close to the family testified about Kody's financial habits. Some described him as careless, funneling money into projects without consulting anyone. Others spoke of heated arguments, where Meri had confronted him about missing funds, only to be dismissed or silenced. One former associate revealed that Kody had openly bragged about using Meri's business money to cover his personal debts, assuming she would never fight him on it. These testimonies painted a damning picture. Kody wasn't a misunderstood husband. He was a man who had abused trust, taken advantage of loyalty, and used family as a shield for his actions. By the midpoint of the trial, the tone had shifted dramatically. Initially, Kody acted like the center of attention, believing that he could control the script. But as testimonies mounted, his swagger turned to annoyance. Then rage, then desperation. Witnesses saw how he shifted uncomfortably in his seat, how his eyes nervously shifted when papers were shown. The suave patriarch had disappeared, replaced by a man trapped by the fabrications he believed would shield him. The jury and judge weren't swayed by his theatrics. Every time he tried to twist the truth, Meri's attorneys calmly pulled it back with receipts, recordings, and witnesses. While the courtroom drama unfolded, the world outside was watching closely. Sister Wives fans devoured each headline. The internet erupted with tweets, memes, and arguments. For a lot of observers, this wasn't simply a courtroom case, it was the public shaming of a man everyone had suspected long ago to be masquerading behind ego and charm. Kody had worked for years, building an image for TV, the assertive father, the faithful husband, the visionary man, and in court, all of it exploded. Here he was not a celebrity. He was a defendant, and every newspaper headline eroded his reputation. Kody Brown embroiled in money misleadingness, secret courtroom recordings reveal scandalous confessions. The downfall of reality TV patriarch. By the end of Kody's defense, there was one fact that could not be denied. His approach had failed. He had depended on using the same methods he applied to his household: gaslighting, deflection, spinning facts. But in court, those moves fell apart under questioning. The falsehoods that had previously kept him in power now rested as testimony against him. For years, Kody thought he could warp reality to his story, but reality does not warp before a judge. Reality is documented in bank statements, logged in meetings, attested to by witnesses. And reality was not on Kody's side. At the close of Section 2 of this saga, one fact was certain: Kody's defense wasn't a shield. It was a web of deceit, and each strand was breaking one by one. The courtroom had been deceived no more. The attorneys had uncovered the truth. And Meri, once the silenced wife, now stood in her most powerful position to date. For Kody, the trial was no longer a matter of winning. It was survival. His empire, his reputation, his identity as the patriarch of the Brown family, his everything was hanging by a thread. And that thread was soon to snap. As Meri stepped up onto the stand, the entire courtroom leaned forward. This was not the reserved, push-to-the-side woman viewers had witnessed on television. This was a new woman, strong, steady, and ready to tell her truth. She recounted years of emotional abuse, of being made to feel invisible all the time, of inquiring about money, only to be informed she was overreacting. She spoke about the many times she had been gaslighted, forced to feel insane for questioning what was going on with their finances. Her words weren't testimony, they were liberation. Every sentence had the weight of decades of silence exploding. The room was on tenterhooks for her words. Then her lawyer introduced the smoking gun: precise financial records demonstrating the very $540,000 Kody had mismanaged. It wasn't guesswork. It wasn't speculation. It was fact. Meri didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply looked at the judge with a quiet strength, as if to say, "This is my truth, and I'm finally free to speak it." The room went silent. After days of denials, bickering, and angry tirades from Kody, everyone looked to one woman. Meri Brown stood up, smoothed out her blazer, and moved cautiously toward the witness stand. Her steps were deliberate, but every step contained years of baggage, years of silence, years of being pushed aside, years of having her voice suffocated by the man facing her. For years she had been portrayed as the quiet type, the forgotten wife, the left behind one. But here, under oath, before judge and jury, Meri was no longer silent. She was prepared to tell her story. And the truth she held would revolutionize everything. Meri's story wasn't one of overnight bravery. It was built on years of endurance, of being told her feelings didn't matter, of being made to question her reality. She recalled the many nights she had spent alone, waiting for Kody to return, then seeing him drive by her house to spend the night with Robin. She recalled the pain of having him declare, on national television, that he no longer had a romantic relationship with her. She recalled the shame of feeling like a burden to be dealt with instead of a partner. But the betrayal financially stung the most. For years she had worked hard on ventures, businesses that she thought would provide her with freedom, something she could call her own, only to find out the money she earned went into Kody's business, without her even knowing it. That betrayal was the gasoline she brought to the courtroom, and as she settled into the witness chair to testify, she wasn't sitting there as Meri, the pushed-out wife. She was sitting there as Meri, the woman taking back her power. The first question from the attorney was straightforward. "Meri, can you tell me in your own words why you're here today?" she breathed. The courtroom leaned in. "I'm here," she started, her voice firm but emotional, "because I spent years being informed that I didn't count. I was informed my money didn't count, my work didn't count, and my voice didn't count, but I'm here to show that it does." Gasps were heard in the crowd. It wasn't outrage in her voice. It was conviction. Meri recounted how she first noticed funds missing, how she would ask Kody about them, only to be brushed off with dismissals like, "You're overreacting." How she was told that questioning him meant she didn't trust the family. How every time she pressed for answers, she was made to feel like the problem. Her voice broke at times, but she never lost composure. She painted a vivid picture of emotional neglect mixed with financial deceit, and as she spoke, people could feel decades of silence lifting. Words alone could be dismissed, but Meri's team had come prepared with proof. One at a time, her lawyer presented her bank statements, contracts and account records. The trend was not debatable. Money earned by Meri, money intended for her, was funneled into accounts controlled only by Kody. In some instances, it had even been spent on properties and business ventures tied only to him and Robin. The judge studied the papers carefully. The jury took notes. Each page was another nail in the coffin of Kody's defense. Meri watched silently as her years of suspicions were validated right there in black and white. The lies, the dismissals, the gaslighting, all of it was exposed. But Meri's testimony wasn't just about numbers. It was about the emotional toll. She explained how Kody's dismissals made her doubt her own sanity. How she would stay awake at night wondering if she was crazy for noticing money missing. How he'd inform her she was imagining things or making drama whenever she had the guts to ask questions. Her voice shook as she spoke. "For years I wondered maybe it was me, maybe I was the issue. But seeing those records, I knew I wasn't crazy. I was correct all along. And he knew it." The room was quiet. Even those who had questioned her sensed the reality in her words. Kody's lawyers attempted to shake her. They fired off leading questions, suggested she was overstating things, and even hinted she was acting solely out of spite. But Meri did not bat an eyelid. Each response was composed, measured, and fact-based. When they suggested she was bitter, she answered, "This isn't bitterness, this is accountability. And if fighting for myself appears to be bitterness, then so be it." That sentence in itself became a rallying point throughout social media. Subsequently, replayed and quoted tens of thousands of times by fans who had long hoped Meri would finally speak out. When her testimony progressed, everyone in the courtroom couldn't help but be touched. Pundits wrote furiously. Witnesses leaned forward in their chairs. Even the judge seemed visibly shaken by her poise. For Meri, it was greater than testimony under the law. It was therapy. With each word, she peeled off another piece of the bindings Kody had encircled her with for decades. When she left the stand, The courtroom erupted into a subdued hum. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't raged. She hadn't even yelled. She just told the truth. And it was more effective than any tantrum. For years, fans had seen Meri as the one left behind, the wife who stayed even when the love was gone, the woman clinging to scraps of affection from a husband who clearly favored someone else. But that day in court, a new Meri emerged. Strong, independent, fearless. Social media exploded with support. This is the Meri we've been waiting for. She's finally free. Kody underestimated her. And now it's costing him everything. Meri had gone from sideline to center stage, and the world was cheering her on. Yes, the lawsuit was about $540,000. But Meri's triumph wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in dignity. For the first time, she stood toe-to-toe with Kody and refused to back down. She wasn't silenced. She wasn't dismissed. And she wasn't gaslighted. She was believed. That validation was worth more than the money. It was evidence that she had always been right. Evidence that her voice counted. Evidence that she was braver than the decades of anguish she suffered. When Meri walked out of the courtroom on this day, she wasn't just walking out with evidence in her favor. She was walking out with liberty. Liberty from the silence that bound her. Freedom from the gaslighting that had broken her down. Freedom from the man who had once convinced her she was nothing without him. She walked out taller, prouder, and stronger than ever before. And as the doors closed behind her, one thing became crystal clear. This wasn't just Meri's testimony. This was Meri's triumph. She had finally broken free. When the judge delivered the ruling in Meri's favor, awarding her the full $540,000, the room erupted in gasps and whispers. For Meri, it was validation. For Kody, it was devastation. His face reddened as he violently shook his head. He couldn't comprehend. The man who had dominated his family for so long, who had deluded himself into believing that he was above the law, had just been beaten. And the worst news? It was Meri whom he had written off, who had done it to him. But instead of accepting the verdict with grace, Kody's meltdown began. The courtroom was still buzzing from Meri's powerful testimony. Her quiet strength, her undeniable evidence, and her unshakable composure had left an impression on everyone present. For the first time in years, the truth had been spoken without fear, and it had landed with devastating impact. Across the room, Kody sat rigid in his chair, his jaw set firm, his eyes locked on the judge. His attorneys whispered hysterically, but he hardly seemed to listen. His world was shattering, and the man who had once believed himself above the law was on the brink of bursting. What transpired was not a defense. It was not a rebuttal. It was a meltdown. A public unmasking of the anger, insecurity, and desperation that had been simmering underneath Kody's polished veneer for years. This was not the assertive patriarch that viewers had come to know on TV. This was a man losing his grip in real time. It started the moment that the judge issued the ruling. Meri Brown is hereby granted the amount of $540,000 in damages. The words hung in the air like a time bomb. Meri closed her eyes for an instant, letting out a soft, silent sigh of relief. But Kody, he blew his top. His face flushed bright red, his fists bunched against the table, and his whole body went rigid. Witnesses compared him to a volcano about to erupt. And erupt he did. "This is preposterous," he yelled, his voice ringing out in the courtroom. "This is biased. This is merely a witch hunt against me." There were gasps in the room. The judge slammed the gavel for order. But Kody's fury had already consumed him. In his breakdown, Kody's fury had no focus. It flailed at everyone and everything. He lashed out first at Meri, finger pointed accusingly at her. "She's doing this because she's bitter. She's jealous. She's been against me for years. And now she's just trying to destroy me." Next he turned on her lawyers, blaming them for tampering with evidence. "You twisted everything. You made it look worse than it is. You're liars. Every one of you." He didn't stop there. He even assaulted the judicial system itself. "This court does not get plural families. You don't get how we operate. This is discrimination against me and my way of life." Each phrase only served to make matters worse. His attorneys pulled on his arm, whispering wildly for him to desist. The judge warned him again, but Kody was past it. Years of rage, years of letting go, years of ego being stroked. Now all of it was coming crashing down. and he couldn't help himself. For years, the sister-wives faithful had argued back and forth about who Kody actually was. Was he the charming, if occasionally defective, patriarch who merely wanted the best for his children? Or was he the manipulative father who lived on control and nepotism? All day in court, the facade remained intact. His anger wasn't the anger of an outraged, wrongly accused man. It was the anger of a man who refused to lose control. Each bellow, each accusation, each wild charge broadcasted his desperation. He didn't care about truth, he cared about saving his ego, and in his struggle to save it, he revealed himself to the world. The judge leaned forward, her patience having grown very thin. "Mr. Brown, calm down right now, or you will be in contempt of court." But still, that didn't slow him down. His voice increased in volume, his language more desperate. He invoked the judge's bias, alleged that the system was against him, and raged about how no one honored his sacrifices. Kody fell silent for a brief moment, but his body language said it all. His shaking hands, his twitching jaw, his wild eyes darting around the courtroom. The man who once prided himself on composure was now a storm barely contained. Word of Kody's meltdown spread quickly. Reporters who had been live tweeting the trial described the scene as explosive, unhinged, and unlike anything we've ever seen. Sister Wives fans responded online in shock, but also in a bizarre sense of validation. For years there had been suspicion that Kody's highly produced TV personality was in fact just a persona. And now, in a courtroom where cameras weren't scripted and edits weren't managed, the truth had been revealed. One of them posted, "This is the true Kody, not the one TLC presents to us. This is the man Meri, Janelle, and Christine lived with." Another posted, "He didn't lose control because he was innocent. He lost control because he got caught." The meltdown didn't hurt his case alone. It hurt his image. And for someone like Kody, whose life was based entirely on image, that was catastrophic. Behind the scenes, Kody's attorneys were in disarray. They had arrived at the trial confident, with strategies and arguments under their belts. But nothing could prepare them for the behavior of their client. With every outburst by Kody, his case grew weaker. With each time that he belittled Meri, he substantiated her allegations of emotional abuse. With each time he claimed the system was biased, he made himself appear paranoid. At one point, one of his lawyers reportedly whispered, "You're sinking us." But Kody didn't care. In that moment, he wasn't thinking about strategy or outcomes. He was thinking about power. And power, to him, was slipping through his fingers. As the hours dragged on, Kody's rage began to give way to something else: desperation. His voice broke as he protested that he had done it all for the family. His eyes welled up with angry tears as he protested that he had been misunderstood. The hot flashes of temper transformed into rambling monologues, babble and tedious. Witnesses described it as watching a balloon go flat. The arrogant male who had come into court raging was now slumped in his seat, exhausted and defeated. And for Meri, seated across the room, it was a moment of poetic justice. She did not gloat. She did not smirk. She did nothing more than sit in silence, observing that the meltdown was evidence she'd been correct all along. Kody's meltdown wasn't only courtroom drama, it was symbolic. For years he had controlled the narrative, positioning himself at the center of everything. He had dictated the use of money, the structure of relationships, how the family presented themselves to the world. But here, in this room, he didn't have control. He couldn't edit the footage. He couldn't shut up Meri. He couldn't manipulate reality into his conception of truth. His breakdown was the literal manifestation of his empire falling apart. The deceptions that had shielded him earlier on had now brought him down. Through the gavel's last fall, that day the courtroom had been a witness to something incredible. Meri had discovered her voice. The truth had been told, and Kody Brown, the person who had thought he was above the law, had disintegrated before their eyes. He emerged from the courtroom that day, not a winner, not a patriarch, but a shattered man. His chin was dropped low, his shoulders rolled forward, his once booming voice silenced to mere muttering. The breakdown wasn't an outburst of rage. It was the disintegration of an image. The dissolution of an illusion. The stripping away of a man destroyed by his own deceptions. And for Meri, for the family, and for the world in witness, it was evident the Kody Brown that they once knew was gone. Witnesses described the scene as chaotic. Kody shot up from his seat, shouting at the judge, accusing the court of bias, and even turning on Meri's lawyers with wild accusations. He claimed the system was unfair. He claimed Meri was out for revenge. He claimed the truth had been twisted. But the more he shouted, the more desperate he looked. The judge rapped on the gavel, telling him to tone it down. But Kody could not. Years of dominance, years of manipulation, years of believing he was the all-powerful center of everything, were all being let slide in front of his eyes. For those of us watching, it was the moment the mask completely slipped off. The authoritative patriarch was no more. Standing before them was a man reduced to nothing by his own deceit, seething at a truth he could no longer avoid. When the gavel finally fell, the courtroom slowly cleared, as if no one wanted to depart the sight of history. Meri had won not merely the $540,000, not merely her case, but something much more profound. She had taken back her voice, her dignity, and her freedom. But as journalists converged, cameras snapped, and headlines started circulating, it was apparent this was merely the start. The repercussions of the trial would splash far beyond the walls of that courtroom. For Meri, it would mean standing in the limelight as her own individual, for the first time. For Kody, it would mean having consequences he never could have envisioned, and for the global audience, it was seeing the rebirth of a woman who was previously considered broken. The instant Meri emerged from the courthouse, she was greeted with applause. Cheering supporters stood on the sidewalk, some waving signs of encouragement, others merely clapping as she passed by. For so many years, she had been pitied, criticized, or overlooked. But now, she was hailed. Meri paused briefly at the steps, looking out at the crowd. She didn't make a long speech. She didn't need to. With a quiet smile and a simple statement, she said, "This isn't just about me, this is about standing up when you've been silenced for too long." Those words caught fire within hours. Footage of her emerging from the courthouse steps, her head held high, was played and replayed across television and social media. Fans dubbed it her Phoenix moment, emerging out of the ashes of years of suffering into a better, freer her. At the same time, Kody was a shadow of his former self. Once the self-assured patriarch who strode across television screens, he now ducked the cameras, his eyes concealed behind sunglasses. Leaks emerged that his financial issues had intensified. The $540,000 payment to Meri was just the start. Other debts and commitments were adding up. TLC brass were said to be rethinking Sister Wives' direction, asking if Kody's presence was more curse than blessing. On social media, his breakdown in court was analyzed ad infinitum. Memes ridiculed his tantrums. Hashtags such as #KodyUnraveled and #MeriWins went viral for days. Public sympathy, which had been a means to keep him in control, now entirely went towards Meri. The guy who had previously set the family story straight now found himself removed from it. Christine, Janelle, and even Robin couldn't escape the fallout. Each was forced to answer questions from fans and reporters about the trial, the money, and Kody's behavior. Christine, already separated from Kody, was quick to praise Meri publicly. "She deserves this win," she said in an interview. "She deserves peace, happiness, and independence. I'm proud of her." Janelle, ever practical, did not say much, but her silence was deafening. Fans saw her quietly liking affirming tweets concerning Meri on social media, indicating quiet support. Robin, though, defended Kody. Crying and on the defensive, she claimed the court had been unjust and that the family was being broken apart by deceit. But even her defense could not mute the nearly universal support for Meri. The trial was not an ending, but a beginning, for Meri. With the financial payout, she had stability. With the public sympathy, she had momentum. And with her own renewed confidence, she had mission. She started to travel, giving her story at empowerment gatherings, and working quietly on a memoir of her time. Fans said she was radiant, lighter than she'd appeared in years. The tired look of the woman with too much weight was gone. replaced by a woman transformed. "I feel like I can finally breathe," she said to one interviewer. "I used to think I had to accept what I was given for so long, but now I know I can make my own life on my own terms." Meri's story wasn't just hers. It became a symbol for thousands of viewers who had felt silenced in their own lives. Messages poured in from women who saw themselves in her journey, trapped in controlling relationships, dismissed when they asked questions, gaslit into doubting their own reality. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about Kody. It was about showing that even after decades of silence, your voice still matters. This message resonated far beyond the Sister Wives fandom. News outlets framed it as a story of empowerment, resilience, and justice. In many ways, Meri had become bigger than the show itself. While Meri's star rose, Kody's world grew smaller. Viewers distanced themselves. Business partners backed away. Even some family members cut ties quietly, unwilling to be dragged down by his bitterness. Insiders characterized him as alone, pacing his bare house, seething with rage against the system, the media, and anyone who dared to celebrate Meri. He blamed them all but himself. But inside, the reality gnawed at him. He wasn't the victim. He had been exposed. The trial was a line in the sand for the Brown family. Prior to it, Kody was still the focal point. The husband, the father, the decision-maker. Post it, that illusion was broken. Meri had established that she didn't require him. Christine had already left. Janelle was off living on her own terms. Even Robin, as loyal as she was, found herself scrambling to defend her decision. For the children as well, the trial was an eye-opener. Several of them had already drifted away from Kody, but watching their mother figures stand their ground only made them more determined to chart their own course. The authority Kody had earlier wielded over the family was lost, with a passive but unyielding independence from every one of them replacing it. The court drama wasn't merely tabloid soap opera. It became cultural analysis. Talk shows, podcasts, and opinion columns picked apart each detail. Some termed it the trial that killed the polygamist fantasy, laying bare the flaws in a lifestyle Kody formally touted as perfect. Others regarded it as one of the most significant reality TV moments in years. And at the forefront of it all was Meri, once ignored, now lauded. She had transformed from an asterisk in her own family history to the star of a cultural phenomenon. With her hard-won freedom, Meri didn't withdraw into seclusion. Rather, she leaned into her role. She embarked on new business ventures, worked on individual development, and even teased projects down the line outside of the Sister Wives brand. She became a motivational speaker for women's events, offering her testimony of resilience and self-worth. Above all, she rebuilt her life with happiness. She traveled, reunited with friends, and pursued interests that had been laid dormant for years. For the first time in decades, she wasn't defined by her relationship to Kody. She was defined by herself. As the dust settled, one truth became undeniable. The courtroom battle had been the end of Kody's reign, but the beginning of Meri's freedom. She had faced him, exposed the lies, and walked away not just with justice, but with strength. Her story had inspired millions, but more importantly, it had healed her. In interviews, she often repeated one phrase: "I'm not broken, I'm free." And that quite possibly is the trial's legacy. Not Kody's breakdown, not the cash, but Meri Brown's rebirth. The woman who showed that even after decades of silence, you can rise, take back your voice, and pen a brand new page.